And hello and welcome to our second session here. This is Collaborative Session number 2. Thank you for joining me for this session, and I do hope that you had a good time with the last session and some good thoughts and ideas that maybe provoked some questions and were able to get into the discussion board as well and offer some suggestions to your colleagues that you haven't had the opportunity to view the last session. This session we're just going to kind of take a look at interagency collaboration at a new level and a different area. We're going to take a look at how the planning process is going to be developed and focused upon, and we're also going to take a look at how exercises, and I don't mean like jumping jacks and bar curls and everything. No, none of that. We're talking about full-scale exercises, tabletop exercises, etc., that will be involved in the interagency collaborative process. And that'll kind of wrap up our session. So it kind of blends from units 4, 5, and 6. I'll touch upon certain things and highlights from each of those units. As you know, the lessons that are there are written as such that have a lot of information. I'm just here to highlight some of that information and perhaps throw some different angles and different points of view rather than just coming out of the text and out of the lecture itself. So with that, if again you have any questions, please feel free to contact me. You can reach me at area code 219-746-3445. That's my iPhone number, and you can get me on that pretty much all day. Please be respectful of time in your local area. So if you happen to be on Pacific time and you're sending out a text message to me at 8 p.m., more than likely, I'm the way of the dodo at that time, meaning I will not be answering you until the next morning. So please be respectful of my time and the time zone that we have here in the Chicagoland area. Also, keep in mind that you can get me via email at david.milan@columbiasouthern.edu for any questions that you may have. Okay, with that, let's move on to our lecture here, and let's take a look at our community operations. So in as much, the first step basically in any element for interagency and developmental planning and training for that matter will be the ability to understand a committee. Well, who's on a committee? What is a committee? A committee can basically consist of 3 people. You can't really have a committee of 2. That's more like a team, or what I refer to as a tag team. What do you think? What do you think? And I vote yes, I vote no. Well, you're at a standstill. So you're not going to be going too many places. Basically, you're looking at having the responsibility of your local emergency management and managers to form a planning committee, develop a plan that is going to be directly used for your particular area. If it's going to be in hazardous materials, or if it's going to be dealing with flooding, or if we're going to be discussing a different type of disaster, or if you're going to be planning for a catastrophic event, it's going to be up to the planning committee to do so. And a lot of this is going to be the response efforts to protect and support the population as well as that designated jurisdiction. So in essence, you need to get together a crew of people and to form a committee that are going to work well with one another, that are going to respectfully disagree with one another on certain areas. We're all human beings. We all have different thoughts. We all have different ideologies that we possess, and that's what makes us unique. But in this type of environment, we are looking at the common goal of saving people's lives in most instances here. Rather than just an exercise, we are planning for the worst case scenario, or perhaps touching up upon some of the areas that were not looked at in the past year due to so many different changes, or if there happen to be people that were moving on to bigger and better things, we might need to make minor adjustments to things. However, in this case, we may be looking at planning for that particular event, if it's going to be a tornado or if it's going to be a hurricane. That's these are some of the areas that we need to look at. So keep that in mind as you move along with your committee and your committee operations. In looking at your committee operations, now that you have identified your committee and including people in your committee, you're going to be looking at natural and human-made disasters that are out there and the threats and the hazards that are going to make an impact in your community. Hopefully these will not be too grandiose by any stretch of the imagination, but you do have to keep in mind that you do have to plan for the worst and that you do have to hope for the best. So identifying the natural and human-made causes for those disasters will be the second step after you have your committee together. Let me digress for a minute in particular to the committee that you have. Your committee members are going to consist of people that are going to work internally with you. There may be your immediate team members, but you may also want to think outside the box and have external community partnerships that'll be involved in assisting you in making up your plans and your training and your exercises and some of these after-action reports that are very imperative for your successful operations in the future. So realize that it's not just going to be an internal operation. It's good to have people come in from the American Red Cross, the Salvation Army, your faith-based organizations, as well as some of your other community stakeholders that are coming into play. What I affectionately refer to as the alphabet police, meaning your PD, your FD, your EMS, and all those people that are out there that are willing to share their thoughts, their ideas, and their resources with you when the chips are down, if they can do so. Eventually, you can work alongside them and create a memorandum of understanding in an effort to say, hey, yeah, we're all on the same page, no pun intended. We're all going to be working here together, and we're all going to be here in your time of need. And that's a good way of getting to this point where you're going to be identifying not only your committee, but also in your second step here, identifying the hazards within your community. So once you identify those hazards, once you do have a robust committee that you're going to be working alongside, then you have the opportunity for the investigation or the research of past threats and issues that took place in your community. And that's going to be available through your local emergency manager, or if you happen to be the local emergency manager, check your files. Look for this stuff. It's probably there. You just need to do a little bit of research. That nasty R word that's always out there that we don't like to do because we're afraid of it. It's not just going to miraculously pop up. But even take a look at the library, any historical societies for your local area, and also the National Weather Service may have some articles and things that may help you along in regards to planning for your community operations and plans here. So understand that it's not just going to be a 5-minute ordeal in looking for these things. It may take several days, it may take a week, it may take a month. You don't know. It depends on how thorough you want to be when trying to get your identification of your hazards in your community. We can see that maybe flooding has been a major problem. If you happen to live next to rail yards and have a heavy industry around there, well, you're going to be dealing with hazardous materials and explosions and derailments and different types of things that are going to make an impact in the community. And some of these are going to be downwind. Some of these areas are going to be needing evacuation, as well as perhaps relocating. It's just going to depend on that. But these are some of the areas you need to consider too. And then state and local agencies also have records of the response efforts that were made to an emergency or any type of disaster. Again, it's going to take research, it's going to take perseverance, it's going to take a little bit of time, and also you're going to have to be willing to meet with your community stakeholders and other stakeholders in an effort to create your community operations plan. Now the next step, the third step in our emergency operations and community operations planning phase is basically to establish a profile of sorts of the known and potential threats that you have researched. Now these hazards can again be from anything dealing with hazardous materials to dealing with tornadoes and flooding, etc. And a chart could be developed in order to identify and categorize the frequency and the happenings of these events that can take place. It also can demonstrate the intensity, the magnitude, duration, seasonal pattern, as well as the speed of onset. And FEMA has a good listing here of many of these categories that I have listed. You can also do this in an Excel spreadsheet for simplification purposes, but also understand that if you have all these elements there, this will definitely be able to create a comprehensive community operations plan rather than something that's just going to be skeletal in nature. The community operations plan shouldn't be so detailed that no one on the face of the planet is going to be able to understand exactly what you have written or what you have done. You need something that's going to be, well, snappy, something upbeat, something peppy, something that's going to be made easy for people to find, especially when they're under stressful situations. A tab that's going to say community operations plan, flooding. Boom, you're able to open up to that tab, and then the information is going to be there. Detailed, but not in as much where you're not going to be able to read through or understand it. Bullet points are very good, especially during high times of crises and disasters and emergency events. So keep that in mind. So the third step here is going to be your community operations in dealing with establishing a certain profile, understanding the potential threats and the hazards that are associated with your designated area, and then developing a chart or some type of identification formatting that'll be able to categorize the frequency, the intensity, and the magnitude, as well as the duration of some of these areas and disasters that can take place. In shifting gears a little bit, we're looking at profiling. Do I look good? I certainly hope so. Please, maybe it's the left side that looks a little bit better than the right. Just kidding. Anyway, emergency profiling. That's probably an emergency profile. Just checking to see if you're all listening to me is all. But emergency profiling, this is another area of your emergency operations plan where you're identifying not only geography, but you're also looking at property, infrastructure, demographics, and the overall response organizations that are hopefully going to come to help you during times of crisis. Then the geography is going to be the layout of the land and the weather patterns. We can see, for example, if we are in the flatlands of Kansas and Oklahoma, you can almost bet that there are going to be tornadoes that are coming through there. We're talking tornado alley. We all know that. We understand that. But being able to theorize when these patterns are going to occur, that can also be challenging. Let's face it, we've had tornadoes that have come through in January and February out of the clear blue because of weather patterns changing, because of climate change that may be taking place, believe it or not. But you have to understand that these things can be popping up in an instant. Also understand that the weather patterns are changing. We see that spring is being later and fall is running just way into December and parts of January now because of things that have been changing over the past decades and such. So understand that emergency management plans that have been developed for the past decades and the templates that we used before, those are needing to be updated. And those are going to have to be changed in order to remain contemporary with the times that we have. Also, in looking at a lot of these weather patterns, the National Weather Service can assist in the analysis of the existing and new weather changes that are out there, and some of these areas may pose a significant threat to your particular community. It's just going to depend. You have to understand that a lot of these areas have changed due to development of housing. You're saying, well, wait a minute, Dr. Miner, how does housing have anything to do with the weather change? Well, land is offering up oxygen, trees offer up oxygen, things change in local areas, and if they're cutting down rainforest by thousands of acres per day, obviously it does have an impact on the atmosphere. And it just doesn't stay in one place, folks. It moves from place to place, much as what we're doing here in the United States. Back in the 1800s, when farming was the main and principal economic stimulus that we had, almost 80% of our nation was dealing with farming. Now it's down to almost 0.8% or even less than that, from what I understand, in dealing with food production. Hopefully we don't run out of food. Even me being two-dimensional, I'm probably going to get hungry somewhere along the lines. So just understand there's a possibility that all this land and stuff, we're going to have to move inside. And obviously now that we have technology and all the advancements that we have in science, growing organically, et cetera, et cetera. That's another topic. But my whole point is that there have been changes that are going on. If you change something outside, if you have a huge area where water absorption, for example, is taking place in a cornfield or a bean field, however, now there's a strip mall over there, where is this water going to go? This water has to go someplace. And in the previous collaborative session that we had, I discussed the topic of flooding and some of the issues that my former hospital that I was working alongside, the issues that they had. Because it used to be in a huge open field, no longer now. It's all concrete surrounding them. The water has to go somewhere. It came into the hospital, thus causing the flooding. That's the point I'm trying to make. So, understand, that in order to have a comprehensive plan here for operations, you need to identify this profile. You need to look at all these factors that are going to be involved, whether it's going to be geography, property, the type of infrastructure that's going to be around, the demographics out there, and all the response organizations that are going to be involved as well. Remember that weather patterns are not going to be consistent. Weather patterns are eventually going to change. We understand that. The National Weather Service also can help you out in your emergency operations endeavors, should you choose to use that path in order to have a comprehensive plan created. The fourth step that we have is called data gathering, and this is what we might consider very mundane as such, but there are those of us that enjoy number crunching and figuring out what all these numbers mean. I don't know why, but God bless you for doing so. Better you than me. But it looks better that way when you have all the data accrued, and then you're able to show by the figures and by the book that this is going to take place. It's an educational guess. It's a philosophical guess as to what happened. They said, well, the numbers don't lie. Well, sometimes they're skewed, and you can make numbers and change facts and figures to make them look the way that you want to. My big example that I always used, 4 out of 5 dentists surveyed. Okay, well, there's probably 5 dentists there, and yeah, they did take 4, and they all were saying, yeah, that's exactly what it is. So that's the reason why 4 out of 5 dentists surveyed. They chose that particular product. Much is the same here with data gathering. It's going to just depend on the situation. You can have an educated guess as to what's going to take place in the community based on what has taken place in the years past or previous disasters or people that have lived here for a good number of years. They can be a good resource too for your data gathering. But we're looking at the information about the threats, the hazards, and then the data about the population and the structures in an effort to determine the vulnerability of what's going on in the community. Then this analysis is going to be included with all the resources that are needed to respond to that particular disaster. Once you have something of a good foundation here, then you can move forward. Don't just think, okay, I have the data, it's been gathered, here are the numbers, and now we can include that in our plan and we're done. That's not the case. The fourth step is very critical. This is like chapter 4 of a dissertation, more or less, where you're looking at what the results are after gathering the data. How can that be applicable to the community? What's going to be impacted? What was impacted before? And if you can have what I refer to as an eclectic blend of things in dealing with not only numbers, but also doing observations over the past few years, and also being able to get out into the community and ask people and community members that have been there for quite some time regarding these disasters and what has taken place and what were some of the benefits of learning from these disasters and what were some of the shortcomings. You have a better idea of how to put together this operations plan, as well as informing those local jurisdictions that may be responding to you. So again, it's a collaborative effort, and it deals with a lot of communication during data gathering as well as the analysis portion. The fifth step here is local planning, and that's very important because local planning committee is going to develop some of the scenarios and the potential risks that are going to be involved in the community. Your hazardous materials, the other hazards that are going to be substantiated in your community, they all can be done through local planning. So these scenarios, for example, are going to impact the entire community. You don't just think, okay, well, if you have 28 square miles of a given city, you're not just going to plan for the northernmost part of that community. You're going to be everybody else because, as we all know, disasters are not just going to stop at a certain point in that designated community or a certain street. They're going to spill over into the next, into the next, into the next. So these scenarios are going to impact the entire community, all the vulnerable populations that are going to be involved, as well as the effect of the hazard on public services and the structures themselves. An example here, a case in point, if you happen to have a rail yard and you have many chemicals that are being transported and it happens to derail, God forbid, then you have an opportunity now to understand the impact. And now if these are highly flammable and they're on fire and the wind is blowing off a lake or a reservoir at a good clip or gust, that's going to move from one community into the next until it thins out. However, this could travel for miles depending on how intense this accident is. keep that in mind. Your vulnerable populations may have to be evacuated from the local nursing home that's just down the street from the rail yard. You're also going to have to think about the kids in schools, your pediatric populations, your elderly populations that are living at that home that may have to shelter in place because they can't be moved because of their health condition. A lot of situations and a lot of circumstances that can occur, but something that you have to think about when you're planning out there. So just remember, your planning committee is definitely going to be a top priority, and then being able to create and develop some of these scenarios. This is where that tabletop exercise comes into play, and a lot of good things can come out of those tabletop exercises. It's not just for the benefit of your organization, it's for the benefit of the community. If you can invite local community members as well as some of these faith-based organizations, your NGOs, etc., and feed them a little bit. Food does help. It entices people to come in, but if your budget allows so and you can do it, this is something that will be a benefit to all people that are in the community as well as those that are going to be responding. You're all on the same page, and there's no really right or wrong answer during these tabletop exercises. You're holding a conversation and discussion over a scenario that could possibly occur within your designated area, and it gets other people thinking, well, what if that impacts our area, and how would I respond to that, and what resources would I have to provide for this particular area should this event occur. So it's an open forum, and the after-action reports are oftentimes very, very detailed due to the fact that you find out so many different things and so many suggestions, and this is where that memorandum of understanding can come into play later on down the line. So some of the final phases here with the planning committee. Now that you've gone through all these areas and you've done your background and your research, and you've discovered what the problem is or what the hazard is within that community. Now you've accrued all that data. Now you're starting to meet with your local planning committees, etc. Then these are some of the final steps that we're going to be looking at. So after the local emergency planning committee completes all the aforementioned steps that we have just gone through, it's important to continue to conduct an annual review of this. We discussed this in Collaborative Session 1, for those of you who remember. So in that, we need to understand that plans are going to change, people are going to move to different places, and the demographics are going to change as well as the geographics are going to change. It's going to make a difference. So the plan has to reflect a lot of the changes that are going on within the population, the hazards that may change within the population. Say, well, wait a minute, how can a hazard change within the population? Again, it goes back to some of the infrastructure. So, for example, if we have an area that may have been a heavily industrialized area back in the 1940s, 50s, and 60s, and maybe a lot of these mills and things have gone away, well, there's not going to be that much of a need for a response to some of these areas that were high-profile areas at that time. Now maybe it's shifted over into casinos and the boats that are going to be in that particular harbor where these mills once stood. That's going to reflect how you're going to change your emergency plans, and the local planning committee has to be part of that. I've worked alongside many committees and community members where a lot of these plans were based on things from nuclear fallout and nuclear bomb shelters and things that are still in the basements of many of these city halls and things. Probably in this day and age, it might not be a good idea, or may be a good idea to have. However, what my point is that a lot of these things are phased out. A lot of these things need to be updated, and unfortunately, through attrition, they've been passed down and not looked at. You need to blow the dust off these things and take a look at them, because when a crisis does happen, like COVID-19, like rioting and looting and anarchy in our country, these are things that have not really been planned for, and why not? Well, let's face it, we're a peaceful nation, and we're not expecting and anticipating that type of thing. It's in the back of our minds. We know that it's there. We know that it's existed before, but not at this magnitude. So now is the time to understand that this can occur, and hopefully in the future, from lessons learned, these are the things that can be put in place as far as a policy is concerned. Again, your population can change too. You may have people that are living within that bedroom community since the 1930s all the way up until present, and you have an elderly population that's there. So that population is going to have to be attended to, and you're going to have to figure out how to evacuate that population should a disaster occur, if it's going to be flooding or some other different type of hazard that's out there. You need to understand that this is something very important to those people's lives. Again, that's the population. And then structures within the community. Buildings are going to be taken down and buildings are going to be built back up. Farmland is going to be taken away and land is going to be given back, and et cetera. So it's almost like that as the tide ebbs and flows, things are going to come and go. And as an emergency planner, you need to be prepared for that. It's not going to be the same situation all the time. New things are going to be introduced into the community all the time. Being on top of this is definitely part of the job of being an emergency manager as well as an emergency planner, whether it's going to be at the local city hall or if it's going to be at the county level. You need to be on top of it. So again, just remember that these steps, the prior steps that we just discussed, are going to be important, that those serve as your foundation, the building blocks to get to this point here where we're going to do an annual review and revise that. Names, faces, and places are going to change continually. Stay on top of that, understand the hazards, the population, as well as the structures in that population, and you should do okay. Exercises. Much like my personal trainer always taught me, throw your legs over your head and now run in place. These are the different types of exercises that you can have. Well, actually, I'm looking at more of emergency management. Although that might be emergency management, you might have to peel my legs back over and put me back in normal. But yeah, my main point here is that you're going to have exercises, you're going to have emergency management and local officials that are going to need to participate in this. I know it's time consuming, I know it costs money. However, in an effort to minimize the life safety risks that are out there with each of these events, it's going to be imperative for successful operations within your community and your office to do so. Understand emergency management, the local government, the fire services, the law enforcement, the public works, public health, hospitals, the National Guard, and all the NGOs that are out there, and they have the ability to test their emergency response plans. They're saying, well, wait a minute, how can we do that if it's just sitting around the table? You can talk, you can imagine, you have to be creative sometimes. If your budget does not permit you to go out there with an FSEX, I finally got it out, full-scale exercise. If you can't, your budget doesn't permit that, then you can't do the tabletop exercise, your TTX. And that's a good way to get thoughts and ideas out on paper and collaborate and communicate and figure out where the resources and the references are in an effort to minimize those life safety issues. It's not going to come overnight. A lot of times there'll be pushback and kickback and say, I don't have time for this. Oh, we don't have the money for that. We don't have a representative for that. Well, I represent 6 departments at my place, and I can't tear away from my work, etc. You may have to meet with these people on the side. You may have to do a smaller version. You may have to get together and figure out what the ideology is behind their thoughts and ideas on different occasions and things. But at least make the attempt, the valiant attempt, saying, hey, we're having this. We're having about 30 people that are coming over there. Food will be provided, and we're going to sit down and have this exercise. This is what the scenario is going to be. Please bring your books, any types of plans that you may have, as well as any computer technology that you feel would be beneficial to you in a real scenario here, and let's talk about it. And that's what it is. It's having a discussion about what if this were to take place. Not you did this wrong and you were in charge of that and failed. That's not what this is about. What it's about is having good people sit around the table to do good things for the people out there that are going to be compromised in perhaps a life and death situation. So make the effort and bring them to the table. So again, the exercises here, it can be a tabletop exercise, a full-scale exercise, as you probably are all aware. That's a lot more involved. A good full-scale exercise is probably going to take you 9 months to a year to plan. And it's dealing with this at least once a month. But if you're the person that's the head honch and trying to get this stuff planned out, you're going to be working on this pretty much at least a couple times a week. That is your new part-time job for the next the next 9 months or a year in order to make it work. If you want it to truly be real, that's the amount of time and dedication that you're going to have to put into it. Again, like anything else, If you put the amount of time and effort into this thing, it's going to work out very well for you in the long run. If you just do it one time a week and haphazardly, well, you reap what you sow, and that's what's going to be. If you're going to do a full-scale exercise, my humble suggestion to you all is to really get involved with it. Have all the key players, delineate certain locations and parts and people and places that people can report back to you, so you're not doing the whole thing. You have a team out there. If you happen to have 30 agencies, well, let them do some of the work and then get together and then work alongside them. You gather the data, you gather the information, you make the final call, put it out to them. This is what I'm thinking of doing, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, that sounds good. Well, let's tweak this, and then maybe we can get involved with this a little bit later. We're not quite prepared for that. You definitely don't want to put people in the hot seat during a full-scale exercise. That's not the point. The point is to learn life safety. The point is to learn from these situations that can happen in a controlled environment and then move forward in a better manner. And being able to say, hey, you know what, we learned a lot from that, and now that we know we need these supplies, or now that we have these phone numbers, that makes it that much easier, and this system works, this system doesn't work, that's the whole point behind it. Don't be afraid to do it, because let's face it, we all want to be perfect, and we all want to shine like a star in front of our peers. This is the time to learn, and a good person that's out there, an emergency manager, is always going to be the humble learner and understand that there's rooms for improvement, regardless of how good we may feel about our current plan. And these exercises further allow these agencies then the opportunity to communicate and interact with one another. It's a lot better to pick up the phone and say, hi, Jim, this is Dave. I have a situation that's going on here. I have water coming into my hospital. Can you please send some units or whatever you have out here? Can you send school buses, because we're going to be unloading our patients over here and we need to get them to our local sister facilities. That's what this is all about. And this is what I was alluding to in the previous slide, that it works out for the best when you have community representation, when you're able to meet with these people. If you have a business card, you just met them at a brunch, they may remember you out of the 1,000 people that they see during the course of the 6 months that they're dealing with. And that's not the way to go. The best thing to do is have those interpersonal relationships that break down any of those barriers that are out there, that are willing to speak with you and are willing to meet with you. And you may have to run 2, 3, 4 times a month to different locations in order to attend meetings, be alongside these community representatives and members, maintain that communication there. Are there any changes that I need to be aware of? This is what we're planning to do for this exercise. How may our community be of assistance to you as well? And that's what this is all about with these exercises. And then, much like I said in previous slides, the participant team names, you need to understand who they are, their roles, their responsibilities, what they're doing, the capabilities of personnel that are going to be in the incident command center, as well as the personnel that are going to be out there in the field. Also, these exercises are here to provide an opportunity for agencies to interact with one another in the incident command setting. Unified command as well is going to be included here. This gives them the opportunity to go and use all the neat little toys that are indeed out there, the technology, the whiteboards, the eraser boards, all the equipment that's out there. These are the great things that can take place with these full-scale exercises. Yeah, it takes a lot of work. Yeah, people are going to be taken out of their natural habitat for that 3-4 hours or however long it's going to last. But in the end, that's when people are going to realize, oh wow, I didn't realize that, or that was really cool, and I didn't really think of that, and maybe I can incorporate that into my operations plan. And somebody comes up with that after-action report for each one of those agencies. Now you have a good idea of what needs to be done in the future. This way, it minimizes the risk to all those life issues that we were talking about before that are associated with these disasters and such. So understand, the exercises, again, are here to further the response agency's opportunity to communicate and collaborate and work with one another, as well as understanding all the names, the titles, the faces, the places, the changes that have taken place, and using all the really cool toys that are out there that we've hopefully purchased with grant money allocation or perhaps from council money allocation. It all comes into play during these full-scale exercises, and it's very important to take those exercises very seriously due to the fact that you have to train as your life depends on it, because it probably does. Now, Just to switch a little bit into our next slide here, emergency response plans, these are going to also include annexes with specific responses to these human-made disasters, as well as like a nuclear energy plant or factory or a chemical plant. And I won't belabor the point because I touched on this before in some previous slides. But remember that there's going to be a designated area like a nuclear energy plant that's going to be specific to that particular emergency operations plan. There's going to be a specific response, specific resources, details, and information that are going to be used. So this is going to be like an annex to a human-made disaster. A factory, human-made, again, things happen. You may have coal dust explosion that's going to blow out the back of a building, and you're going to have to know how to respond to that, and how many units are going to be coming in. Is it along a state line? Does that mean that other states are going to have to respond? Local agencies are going to respond. Who's going to be in charge? Who's the unified commander? Unified commander, the incident commander, etc. And who's going to be the person that's going to be updating the press all the time. So again, these are things that need to be worked out ahead of time. But a lot of these exercises and scenarios are based on an incident that that are identified within the plant and allow the first responders to train with other first responders and to test their equipment. So meaning, if we have a coal producing electrical plant, and we have this explosion that I just mentioned, that might be one of the great options. You can have them test their system and you respond. So for example, if you happen to be a training officer someplace with a local police department, emergency management department, or dealing with FD, then you have an opportunity there to say, okay, well, yeah, we'll participate, we'll send some units, and we'll make it real. It'll be up to that particular industry or industrial setting to be in contact with the hospital perhaps, because they may want patients that are going to be transported to the hospital. This provides us with an opportunity then as a fire department member or EMS service provider to train, to educate, to figure out where we're going into the building, what the entrances and exits are going to be available, what the hazard is, how long we're going to be there, how many units are going to be done, how we're going to communicate with the hospital, how the incident commander dealing with that particular nuclear plant or industrial plant is going to communicate with us and the hospital at the same time, locating members, what are the facilities or situations that are taking place, et cetera, et cetera. So I think you get it by now. But these are all the things that are involved in training for these emergency responses and these emergency response plans being put to the test. Minimally, one time a year, optimally twice a year. It doesn't have to be something major, as I just mentioned, but if it's going to be dealing with some of the situations that are going to be merited, where things have changed completely, or if new buildings are being added onto that plant, well, that might be a consideration to do twice a year for that particular year, now that there's a new place that's there. Let's face it, employees come and go, and if you're the training officer, you need to be on top of things, and you need to be able to educate those people, train those people, and say, this is the way the plant used to be, this is where it is now, this is what we have available here, here's how to get to this place, et cetera, et cetera. This way you're minimizing that life threat to those people. Again, it's just going to depend on the type of chemical plant, the industrial setting, et cetera. And like I said before, a lot of times these emergency response plans and these organizations, these training and exercises offer the opportunities for these people to train and work alongside one another, not only with themselves internally, but externally. We mentioned in the first collaborative session that interagency collaboration is going to be of utmost importance due to the fact that you need to know the names and faces and places that are out there. We have to keep in mind that the incident command system is going to be established, and they're going to need a mutual aid in a major event. So this agreement then is going to be activated for this large disaster. And then moreover, the communications between the agencies, the dispatch centers, and a lot of these emergency operations centers, they're going to be tested, and they need to be included in these emergency response plans and these training exercises. You can't do this alone, folks. I'm sure you're well aware of that, and those of you who have trained out there in the field have found that it's very, very difficult to compose a disaster exercise or a training, let alone try and do a lot of these disasters by yourself. It's just not going to work. You need to take the time and effort to get out there and work alongside one another. Train and educate one another, test the equipment, make sure that it works, and be sure that you have updated equipment. The worst thing on the face of the planet is to go out there and say, well, yeah, I checked this equipment, and it's been 5 years since the last inspection. A lot of these hoses and things are crumbling, cracking, peeling, and they're not working, and now you have a hazardous materials incident, and you can't send people in there. Kind of makes it look bad, right? So be sure that you stay on top of things. We're all busy. We all have tons and tons of things and information that's continually being thrown at us, and we're bombarded with this on a daily basis. But again, if you're working in the right capacity to ensure life safety, not only of your team and your personnel, but also kind of looking good in front of the community, those are some of the steps that I humbly suggest that you take in an effort to minimize some of those risks that are out there. Yes, your exercises and your planning. This, again, is going to take a while. So don't think that this is an overnight thing. Now, you may go on the websites and pull various trainings and exercises that are done out there just to say that you've met the requirements. That's fine, but if you want to be consistent and help your community, you need to go out there and maybe take these templates and tailor make it to your community. Exercises are going to be an ongoing process. This is going to allow you to train with other governments and first responders and other organizations out there to reevaluate both the natural and the human-made disasters. The stakeholders then have an opportunity to not only discuss the community's vulnerability to, for example, a terrorist threat or a terrorist organization, but also identify some of the potential risks that are out there, the risks that are to the population, and then look at each one of these events perhaps separately, and then formulate a specific plan based on training and education and exercises. And finally, the annual exercise cycle is definitely going to be a component for any emergency manager, as well as emergency preparedness in that community. This is going to ensure that there's going to be a fluid response on the capabilities and also the successful operations to respond to that identified risk and hazard. A lot of times we're not going to be able to identify the risk immediately, but as long as we have a good approach, a good faith effort approach to what we're doing out in the field, that is definitely going to minimize our life safety risks, as well as trying to figure out what needs to be done. Again, your operations plan does not have to be a binder filled with each and every incident. You have to be flexible. You have to remain flexible. One thing that's going to be constant in each one of these issues and circumstances and hazards that are going to be presented to you is change. Something is going to change every 2 seconds in a disaster or an emergency, whether it's going to be receiving supplies, whether it's going to be levees failing, whether you're going to be communicating with the press, whether it's going to be team members that have not shown up for this particular incident due to the fact they're protecting their families and loved ones. You're going to have to deal with that, and that's the situation you're going to have to understand. That's why exercises and planning are going to be imperative for you, as well as understanding how the operations are going to work. A good leader out in the field, being flexible, comprehension, and the willingness to listen. That's the big thing. Be willing to listen to your constituents. Be willing to listen and make a final decision based on the information that you've gathered in an effort to make sure that this is the final decision that's going to be benefiting all the people in the community, rather than just hastily making a decision that could cost lives and could cost a lot of infrastructure and internal damage as well. So keep that in mind when you're thinking about exercises and planning those exercises. And with that, I'm sure you got the point by now that exercise planning is important, as well as being able to finance that exercise planning. You're saying, well, Dr. Milan, I have a limited budget. And it's okay. We all have limited budgets in regards to training and education, and those of you who are training officers and have these educational opportunities presented to you that you need to do, they're saying, yes, I need to have this presented and I need to do this, but let me take half your money away. So yeah, this happens all the time, and you are not alone, and that's the way it happens. You need to be creative with it, and if it means You have to cut a few corners on certain things, and if it means, instead of getting real life figures and Annie's and John and whatever else is out there as far as mannequins are concerned, if you have to use paper cutouts, then so be it. You have to be creative, and you may have to say, okay, well, this is what our high class budget has come to. You can make light of that fact. You can get by. You just have to use a little ingenuity in order to do so. Not going to be easy, probably not the ideal situation or scenario that you wanted, but you're still trying, and that's what people are going to look at. Keep that in mind as you're moving forward. Again, please feel free to contact me. I gave you my contact information. It's also in the announcements section there. If you have any questions, also feel free to email me. Please support your colleagues in the discussion boards as well as your papers. Make sure that your papers are being formatted properly. Please read the instructions and what needs to be accomplished in those papers to avoid any unnecessary point deductions. And as a closing thought, just remember, everywhere you go, you'll find yourself there. So with that, you take care, and we'll see you at the next collaborative session for Collaborative Session 3. Thanks for tuning in.